In the 1970s, Good Times was a portrait of hope, laughter, and survival in America's toughest neighborhoods. But behind the smiles, many of the actors paid a brutal price: sickness, addiction, poverty, and quiet disappearances. In 2026, time has weakened their bodies and revealed truths far darker than the show ever allowed. Esther Rolle as Florida Evans. Esther Rolle was born on November 8, 1920, in Pompano Beach, Florida. She was 54 years old when Good Times premiered in 1974. She played Florida Evans, the firm yet compassionate mother who served as the emotional backbone of the Evans family. Rolle entered Good Times with experience and conviction, having originated the Florida Evans character on Maude. As the sitcom gained popularity, she grew increasingly uncomfortable with its creative direction, especially the exaggerated comedic treatment of J.J. Evans. She believed it undermined the dignity of black working-class families and openly challenged the producers. In 1977, she made the difficult decision to leave the show, choosing principle over stability, an act that quietly reshaped her career. After her departure, work became more selective. Though she appeared in landmark projects like Roots and later Driving Miss Daisy, Hollywood largely sidelined her, branding her outspoken stance as difficult. Behind the scenes, Rolle's health began to decline. She suffered from diabetes and later a stroke, gradually retreating from public life as her physical strength weakened. Esther Rolle passed away on November 17, 1998, at the age of 78, due to complications from diabetes. John Amos as James Evans. John Amos was born on December 27, 1939, in Newark, New Jersey. He was 34 years old when Good Times premiered in 1974, bringing rare gravity to the role of James Evans, the strict but deeply principled father who embodied dignity, responsibility, and moral authority within the Evans family. From the beginning, Amos viewed James Evans as more than a sitcom character. He believed the role should reflect the struggles and pride of black working-class men, not reduce them to comic relief. As the show's popularity grew, tensions behind the scenes intensified. Amos repeatedly clashed with producers over storylines he felt weakened the father's authority and reinforced stereotypes. By the end of the third season, those conflicts reached a breaking point, and he was abruptly fired from the series at its peak, a decision that stunned audiences and permanently altered the show's emotional balance. Though removed from Good Times, Amos rebuilt his career with determination. He delivered a powerful performance in Roots in 1977, followed by memorable roles in films such as Coming to America and later Die Hard 2. Yet the loss of James Evans remained a defining wound, one that quietly followed him throughout his career. In later years, Amos lived increasingly out of the spotlight, facing age-related health challenges and periods of physical decline that limited public appearances. In his later years, John Amos lived largely out of the public eye, making only occasional appearances as his health declined with age. Though he remained a respected voice in conversations about dignity and representation, physical limitations gradually slowed his public life. John Amos passed away on August 21, 2024, at the age of 84. His death marked the quiet end of a career defined not by compromise, but by conviction. Jimmie Walker as J.J. Evans. Jimmie Walker, born on June 25, 1947, in Brooklyn, New York. He was 27 years old when Good Times premiered in 1974, and he portrayed J.J. Evans, the loud, fast-talking eldest son whose catchphrase, "Die No Might," quickly became one of the most recognizable lines in American television. Walker's rise was immediate and overwhelming. J.J. was meant to be comic relief, but audience reaction pushed the character to the center of the show. As his popularity exploded, the tone of Good Times shifted, placing broader comedy above realism. While this brought Walker fame, it also created deep tension behind the scenes. Co-stars and critics argued that JJ's exaggerated behavior reinforced stereotypes, and Walker found himself caught between personal success and growing backlash from within the cast. After Good Times ended in 1979, Walker struggled to escape the shadow of JJ. He continued working in stand-up comedy and appeared in films like Let's Do It Again, but none matched the cultural impact of his sitcom fame. By 2026, Jimmie Walker is 79 years old. He lives a largely quiet life, making occasional appearances connected to his legacy. Age has slowed his pace, and he no longer seeks the spotlight that once defined him. Bern Nadette Stannis as Thelma Evans. Born on December 22, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York, Bern Nadette Stannis was 20 years old when Good Times premiered in 1974, stepping into the role of Thelma Evans, the intelligent, graceful middle child whose poise and beauty made her one of the most admired young women on television. At the height of Good Times, Stannis began experiencing serious vocal problems and was later diagnosed with a cyst on her vocal cords. The condition forced her into months of near silence, abruptly interrupting her momentum as a performer. Unable to rely on her voice, she turned inward, discovering writing as both a creative outlet and a means of survival during a period when her identity as an actress felt fragile and uncertain. After Good Times ended, Stannis faced the familiar burden of typecasting. Rather than chase diminishing roles, she gradually shifted her focus toward writing and personal development. She authored books reflecting on self-worth, resilience, and life after fame, reframing her public image from television icon to thoughtful storyteller. Today, Bern Nadette Stannis is 72 years old. She remains active through writing, speaking engagements, and selective appearances, though time has softened her voice and slowed her pace. Ralph Carter as Michael Evans. Ralph Carter was born on May 30th, 1961, in New York City. He was only 13 years old when Good Times premiered in 1974, portraying Michael Evans, the sharp-tongued, politically aware youngest son whose intelligence and moral clarity often cut deeper than the adults around him. Carter's talent was evident early. While still on Good Times, he balanced television fame with Broadway, earning a Tony Award nomination for Raisin in 1974. Yet as the series progressed, the pressures of growing up in the public eye began to weigh heavily. When Good Times ended in 1979, Carter faced the difficult transition from child actor to adult performer, a shift Hollywood rarely handled with care. Rather than chase diminishing roles, Carter chose distance. Acting opportunities slowed, and he gradually stepped away from the industry altogether, prioritizing stability over visibility. Unlike many former child stars, his withdrawal was quiet, but it came with emotional complexity, walking away from an identity the world still expected him to inhabit. As of 2026, Ralph Carter is 65 years old. He lives a private life outside Hollywood, rarely appearing in public and largely removed from the spotlight. Janet Jackson as Penny Gordon. Janet Jackson, born on May 16, 1966, in Gary, Indiana. She was just 11 years old when she joined Good Times in 1977, portraying Penny Gordon, a neglected and abused child whose storylines introduced some of the darkest, most emotional moments the sitcom ever aired. Though her role was brief, its impact was lasting. Penny's arc confronted child abuse and trauma with a seriousness rarely seen on 1970s television, and Jackson's performance revealed a depth far beyond her age. Raised under intense family control and public scrutiny, Jackson's early years were tightly managed, leaving little room for autonomy as fame followed her from childhood into adolescence. As she transitioned into music in the 1980s, personal struggles surfaced. Jackson later spoke openly about battles with depression, low self-worth, and eating disorders, issues rooted in childhood experiences and the burden of perfection placed on her at a young age. Albums like Control and Rhythm Nation 1814 marked not just professional reinvention, but an emotional fight for identity and independence. As of 2026, Janet Jackson is 60 years old. She continues to work selectively in music and performance, choosing privacy and balance over constant visibility. While no longer driven by the relentless pace of her peak years, she remains an enduring cultural figure whose influence spans generations. Jeanette DuBois as Willona Woods. Jeanette DuBois was born on August 5, 1932, in Brooklyn, New York. She was 41 years old when Good Times premiered in 1974, and she played Willona Woods, the sharp-witted, independent neighbor whose humor and emotional honesty brought warmth and realism to the Evans family's world. DuBois entered the series with a strong background in music and acting, and her presence quickly became essential. Beyond performing, she quietly shaped the show's identity, co-writing and singing the iconic Good Times theme song, an achievement that underscored her creative range. As the series progressed, however, opportunities beyond the role narrowed. In later years, DuBois worked steadily but selectively, appearing in projects such as The Wayans Bros. And lending her voice to animation. Privately, her health began to decline, and she withdrew from public life, choosing privacy over visibility. Jeanette DuBois passed away on February 17, 2020, at the age of 87. After suffering cardiac arrest at her home in Glendale, California. She left behind a legacy defined by talent, versatility, and quiet influence, remembered not only as Willona Woods, but as a creative force whose contributions extended far beyond the screen. Johnny Brown as Nathan Bookman. Johnny Brown was born on June 11, 1937, in St. Petersburg, Florida. He was 37 years old when Good Times premiered in 1974, appearing as Nathan Bookman, the building superintendent whose exaggerated manners and comic timing made him a familiar recurring presence in the Evans family's world. Brown's performance leaned into physical comedy and broad humor, which brought laughs but also quietly narrowed how the industry perceived him. After Good Times, he continued working steadily in television, with appearances on shows like Laugh-In and Family Matters, yet roles of greater depth rarely followed. The typecasting that once sustained him gradually limited his range, and his career slowed as television moved on. In his later years, Brown was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a condition that steadily eroded his memory and independence. As the illness progressed, he withdrew from public life, supported by his family, while the man known for his sharp delivery and comedic precision faded from view. Johnny Brown died in Los Angeles on March 2, 2022, at the age of 84. He collapsed shortly after leaving a doctor's appointment for his pacemaker and was pronounced dead after arriving at a hospital. Bubba Smith as Claude. Bubba Smith was born on February 28, 1945, in Orange, Texas. He was 29 years old when he appeared on Good Times in the mid-1970s, portraying Claude, a confident and physically imposing guest character best remembered as one of Thelma Evans' romantic interests. Before television, Smith was already a national figure. A legendary NFL defensive lineman and Super Bowl champion, he transitioned into acting after retiring from football, bringing authenticity and visibility to every role. Appearances in projects like Police Academy later cemented his image as the gentle giant with comic timing. Yet the physical toll of professional football followed him quietly. Years of injuries, surgeries, and chronic pain shaped his post-athletic life, even as his public image remained upbeat. Behind the scenes, Smith struggled with long-term health issues linked to repeated head trauma. In his later years, friends and family noted emotional instability and periods of isolation. Though never openly discussed during his lifetime, concerns about neurological damage became part of the conversation after his death, casting a darker light on the cost of his earlier success. Smith was found dead in his Los Angeles home by his caretaker on August 3, 2011. He was 66 years old. He died from acute drug intoxication and heart disease. Moses Gunn as Carl Dixon. Moses Gunn was born on October 2, 1929, in St. Louis, Missouri. He was in his mid-40s when he appeared on Good Times as Carl Dixon, a guest character whose calm authority and emotional weight briefly but powerfully deepened the series' social realism. Unlike many television performers of the era, Gunn was shaped by theater and serious drama. Before Good Times, he had already made a strong impression in film, most notably as Bumpy Jonas in Shaft, 1971, where his performance carried both menace and dignity. He later appeared in Roots, reinforcing his reputation as an actor capable of grounding large social themes in human vulnerability. Yet despite his talent, Gunn was rarely positioned as a long-term television presence, often confined to guest roles that hinted at depth without offering continuity. Behind the scenes, Gunn lived with chronic health issues for much of his life. He suffered from severe asthma, a condition that increasingly limited his stamina and professional opportunities. As television moved toward faster pacing and broader characters, Gunn's subtle, stage-trained style found fewer outlets. His appearances became less frequent, and his name slowly faded from mainstream recognition. Moses Gunn passed away on December 16, 1993, at the age of 64, due to complications related to asthma. Ben Powers as Keith Anderson. Ben Powers was born on January 30, 1950, in New York City. He was in his mid-20s when he appeared on Good Times as Keith Anderson, a guest character whose storyline reflected the fragile hopes and disappointments faced by young black men trying to find stability in a harsh economic reality. In the 1980s, he gained wider recognition with recurring roles on shows such as L.A. Law, where his restrained, thoughtful performances suggested a future beyond minor guest appearances. As leading opportunities failed to materialize, frustration quietly set in, and his career began to stall. As work became less consistent, he turned to alcohol, a dependency that worsened over time and further damaged his professional prospects. The combination of career disappointment and addiction placed increasing strain on his health, isolating him from the industry that once seemed within reach. By the early 2000s, he had largely withdrawn from acting, living far from the spotlight. Ben Powers passed away on April 6, 2015, at the age of 65, from liver cancer. More than 5 decades later, Good Times still lives on as a symbol of resilience, humor, and hope. But the lives behind the laughter reveal a far more fragile reality. These stories remind us that fame does not protect against time, illness, or loss. Which journey stayed with you the longest? Share your thoughts below, and join us as we continue uncovering the untold stories hidden behind television's most beloved families.